We're talking about horror films about madness here at the Horror Movie Syllabus. But it's not as if the people in these movies are maniacs, some raving thing. They just go a little mad sometimes. We all go a little mad sometimes. Haven't you? Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Horror Movie Syllabus. My name is Professor Victor, and I'll be your host as we go through all the essential, noteworthy, interesting, and downright notorious modern horror films. If you're new to the channel, I recommend you check out our introduction video. I'll leave a link to that in the description below. It'll give you a pretty good idea of what the Horror Movie Syllabus is about, but for now, all you need to know is that we're going to look at a particular subgenre of horror and then examine 3 movies from that subgenre. Today, the subgenre we're looking at is horror films about madness. And that is a admittedly vague subgenre because that can mean a lot of different things. What exactly does madness entail in general and in regards to a horror movie? Well, it's a little bit nebulous, and that is admittedly a little bit by design. As longtime viewers of the syllabus know, there's a lot of overlap amongst the various subgenres, and this is an example of a situation where there are several different subgenres that are very similar, and movies could go into multiple different subgenres under the same category, in this case, psychological horror. So we've got a couple of other subgenres in the psychological horror category that could fit the bill for some of these movies as well. And I don't mind having so many subgenres that are somewhat similar or have a lot of overlap because I tend to like psychological horror. I tend to like these kinds of movies. So getting more of them on the syllabus generally isn't an issue for me. In fact, it's something I prefer. In this case, what we're talking about, though, are movies where the central character or the central plot of the movie has to do with madness or insanity of some sort, generally with the main character or the main antagonist. And the the madness is a key plot point or a key development in the character or the story. And I think that'll be pretty evident when we look at the movies. Now, it's worth noting that when it comes to madness, or really more specifically, mental health, the horror genre as a whole has not been tremendously kind to portrayals of mental health or people suffering from mental health issues. By and large, mental health issues are often shown to be the cause or the primary drive for a villain in a movie, which admittedly isn't great. In particular, issues regarding identity issues, things like that, are portrayed pretty poorly in horror by and large. And even in some of the movies that we're going to talk about here today, that's actually still the case. The fact of the matter is that just, horror is not really a great beacon of shining progressive examples of mental health. It's just a fact. But it has made for some really good movies. So if you can separate yourself from, mental health issues or mental health representation as we understand it today, and just kind of acknowledge the time capsule aspect of some of these movies, especially some of the older movies, then I think you can get behind the movies and just enjoy them for what they are, rather than getting too caught up in the messages that may be being sent that might be a little dated or uninformed. At least that's what I hope so, because I really like the movies that we're going to talk about today. I love the movies that we're going to talk about today. There's some favorites of mine, and I'm not alone in that. As you'll see, the movies we've got today are by and large pretty well liked to beloved. And I mentioned just a few minutes ago that the mental health notions in some of these movies can be pretty dated. Well, that's going to be particularly true, and you'll see what I'm going to get to. But this is going to be one of those videos where I break our rule. Normally, our horror movie syllabus rule is modern horror films, 1970 to the present, and anything pre-1970 is something that only gets discussed in the comments, thanks to some of you diligent people who make recommendations. But today is one of those 3 times, I think it's 3 times in the syllabus, where I'm breaking that rule because this is a movie that has to be in there. But we'll get into that. For now, Let's just say that the movies are organized in undergraduate, graduate, and postgraduate level order, as we tend to do. But in this case, they are in chronological order. So we're going to get to that old movie right quick. In fact, why don't we just go ahead and get to that right now? Our first movie today, our undergraduate selection, is Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho. Now, as I just alluded to, Psycho came out in 1960, so it is well outside of the range of movies we normally talk about today. But it is a bona fide classic, one of the greatest horror movies of all time, so had to squeeze it on the list somehow. If for some reason you're unfamiliar with the story of Psycho, the movie stars then starred Janet Leigh as Marion Crane, a woman working at a real estate company, and a client leaves a large sum of money in cash for her to deposit in the bank over the weekend. And instead she decides to abscond with the money and run off with her boyfriend to help pay off his gambling debts. I think that's what it is. And on her way to meet him, she stops off for a stay at the Bates Motel, a roadside motel run by a charming young man named Norman Bates, who's a little off and has a strange relationship with his domineering mother. Uh, and hijinks abound, and we'll leave it at that in case for some reason you haven't had it spoiled for you already. Now, as I said, Psycho is directed by legendary director Alfred Hitchcock, who is arguably one of the greatest directors we've ever had, and Psycho is one of his most innovative and interesting works. And it's funny because historically the movie was, it's his version of a B movie. It's his version of a trashy horror flick, kind of trying to do it better than everybody else had done. And I think he succeeded. At the time, the movie was unlike anything people had seen. They were shocked and horrified, and there was a lot of hype around it. People not being allowed to go into the theater if they were late and things like that. They really knew how to market it at the time. As a result, the effectiveness of the movie only grew, and it became a huge hit, and ultimately became a bona fide classic horror film and just a classic movie. Period, horror or otherwise. And that's part of why we're talking about it here, even though it's out of scope of the syllabus, is because it's usually cited as the birth of the slasher subgenre, and that's one of my all-time favorite subgenres. Uh, in reality, it's arguably not. Around the same time, same year, a movie called Peeping Tom came out. Really good movie, also. And you can make an argument that Peeping Tom is the progenitor of the slasher subgenre. That Peeping Tom is the one that created the slasher subgenre. But generally, people point to Psycho, and it's frankly because it's more famous and it's better. And that's not to say Peeping Tom is not good, but Psycho is incredible. Now, it's true that Psycho, much ink and words have been spent on Psycho. The vast majority of you watching this have either seen it or at least know about it. So I won't go into the long history of it and the fun details and the things like the chocolate syrup for the blood because it's in black and white, and changing the temperature of the shower water to get Janet Leigh to scream right. And, I guess I am going to go into those things because I just said them. But there's much Psycho lore to delve into, and if you like the movie or if you're interested in it, dive into it. There's lots of YouTube videos, there's lots of articles, documentaries, so there's plenty of material for you there. I just want to talk about putting it here on the syllabus because that's really what we're here to talk about today, is what drove me to put it on the syllabus. Well, number one, I just love it. I love the movie Psycho. It's a lot of fun. Now, even though it is a little dated, it's paced a little bit slow for a modern sensibility. I still think it holds up rather well. And in fact, my buddy showed it to his kids who were at the time they were watching it in their late teens, and they were totally hooked into it. They loved it. So I do think it still has the ability to draw people in and connect with them, even though it is slower than you might be used to, or that younger people might be used to for a horror film in particular. I also just really like the character of Norman Bates, played by Anthony Perkins, who was a fantastic actor. He passed away many years ago, but he was a fantastic actor, and he is incredible in this role. There's just something about him that is both charming and unnerving or unsettling at the same time. He has this boyish innocence and creepiness that works really well in parallel, and it suits the movie incredibly well. And then of course Janet Leigh is great in the movie, and the way Janet Leigh is used in the movie is spectacular. I'm assuming that the vast majority of you know this, but I still don't want to spoil it so much. But I'll just say that if you've seen the movie Scream, it's kind of like Drew Barrymore in Scream. It's a really innovative, clever way to get the audience locked in and really unnerve them, unsettle them, and surprise them. And I think that Hitchcock really did something masterful with that, and I love it. To this day, I still find it to work really, really well. Now, it's worth noting that there have been several sequels to Psycho, and a TV show and a remake. And I love all of it. I really, really like the Psycho franchise. Now, a lot of people might think that's kind of sacrilegious. A lot of people think that, because Psycho is such a classic, you can't really touch it. And they're not necessarily wrong, but I would say to those people, at least give Psycho 2 a chance, because Psycho 2 is surprisingly interesting. It's a lot more of it leans a lot more into the slasher motifs, a lot gorier, by compared to the 1960 Psycho, a lot more lurid, I'd say, but really, really great. And the performances in that one are really strong as well. And then maybe the next two are not quite as interesting, but I find them to be pretty captivating. Again, Anthony Perkins really sells a lot for me on that, so it helps a lot that he's in the sequels. The TV show Bates Motel. If you watched my horror television video, you saw how effusive I was about that. That's a show that shouldn't have worked, but it's absolutely brilliant. So if you like Psycho, I would definitely recommend Bates Motel. And then of course there's the Gus Van Sant remake in the '90s. I'm not going to talk about that right now because I'm going to be talking about that a little bit later. And you're not going to like what I have to say about it, probably. So that'll be fun. That'll be coming up pretty soon. So keep your eyes open for that. But let's just say I'm a big fan of the Psycho series. I really enjoy all of the movies, but none of them come close to the original. The original is the bona fide masterpiece. I talk about bona fide, horror essentials. This is one of them. If you haven't seen Psycho, you absolutely should see Psycho just to have your horror education complete, but also because it's a really, really good movie. Even though you think you know what the movie's about, even though you think you know what happens in it, you might be surprised by it. If for no other reason than just by really fantastic filmmaking, especially if you think to yourself, this was made in 1960. This is 60 years ago, and how well made it is. It's really shocking how good of a movie it is. And then also, narratively speaking, you might be surprised where the movie goes. You may not know as much as you think you know about Psycho. Again, I don't want to spoil anything, because if by any chance somebody's watching who hasn't seen Psycho, watch it right now before anybody spoils it for you, because it's such a good movie with some really interesting, fun twists in it, and I don't want to be the one who ruins the experience for you. Let me know in the comments how you guys feel about Psycho, and let me know how you feel about me cheating a little bit and putting this on the syllabus. But I couldn't not put Psycho on the list. I just couldn't do it. And like I said, there's like 3 times where I just had to bend the rules a bit for this, and this is one of them. And I think that all of you could understand why. It's too important of a movie and too beloved to me to not mention here on the syllabus. So Psycho, let me know what you guys think. The next movie we're talking about today, the graduate level movie, is Stanley Kubrick's The Shining. The Shining came out in 1980 and is another one of these bona fide horror classics that are really legendary and are just incredibly well known and kind of permeate the cultural zeitgeist. If you haven't seen it, the movie is about a struggling writer and his family moving into a Colorado hotel for the off season to be the caretaker. It's a job that will pay him to stay in an empty hotel and have some peace and quiet to write, while the guests are not able to come because of the weather. And then while they're isolated in there, the isolation starts to get to him and drive him a little crazy, or is it the isolation? And we'll leave it at that, because as usual, I don't want to spoil things for you. And if you haven't seen The Shining, that's another one. I definitely don't want to be the one responsible for spoiling. I want it to be a good experience for you if you haven't seen it. And by all means, if you haven't seen it, you should see it. The movie is like I said, very, very well known. It's a Stanley Kubrick movie. It stars Jack Nicholson, Shelley Duvall, and it's got so many lines and references and images from the movie that are just kind of in pop culture. You may have seen, memes or gifs about them, or just heard people do the impressions or do the lines from the movie. Here's Johnny and things like that. It's just a pop culture reference. The movie is a pop culture reference in and of itself. In fact, so much so that Steven Spielberg even did a little thing on it in his movie Ready Player One, which is just a movie chock full of pop culture references, and he did a whole section that's just on The Shining. So it really is like a pop culture reference movie, and it's more than that too, because the movie really resonates with people. There are people that are diehard fans, but I'm one of them. I'd say I'm really a big fan of The Shining, and people, but I'm not the next level fan. Like, there are people that just really parse this out for just all kinds of information and detail and theories, and that's kind of a par for the course for Stanley Kubrick's work. If you're familiar with Stanley Kubrick, he makes these movies, and people really look for like extra messages and things in them. And he pretty much denied those kind of things, and hidden meanings and stuff like that. But The Shining is one in particular where people really look for special hidden meanings and stuff like that. And I don't want to go into that too much, because there's a really great documentary called Room 237 that goes into that in detail, and we're going to be talking about that in the near future as well. So I'll save it for another time. But suffice to say, the fans of this movie are really passionate about it. They're really devoted and kind of obsessive about the movie, which lends itself to its own form of madness, I suppose. But like Psycho, The Shining has a lot of ink spilt on it, a lot of videos about it, a lot of documentaries about it, writings and articles about it, books about it. So there's a lot for you to look for if you're really into it, if you really get intrigued by The Shining. There's a lot of material for you to dive into. But with regards to the syllabus, it's kind of a no-brainer that this one would show up on the syllabus. It's, like I said, a bona fide horror classic. It's well within range of the syllabus's modern era, 1970 to the current. The question was just a matter of where are we going to put it. There's so many subgenres that could have fit into. It could have fit into haunted houses or ghosts, or it could fit into the Stephen King subgenre, which we haven't gotten to yet. It could fit into all kinds of different subgenres, and I just chose to put it in here because, well, the syllabus is a bit of a puzzle, and so it's just a matter of trying to fit everything in there that you want to fit in there. And The Shining is one of those wonderful pieces. It's kind of like a wild card piece. You can kind of stick it in numerous places. So I wound up putting it here, but I think it makes a lot of sense because the crux of the movie is Jack Torrance's descent into madness. Jack Torrance, played by Jack Nicholson, and watching him descend into madness is, to me, the most memorable and most important part of the movie. There's that's up for debate. There's people that will have different opinions on that, but that's my perspective of it. Is that's the central thrust of the movie, is him going mad, him being driven insane in this hotel, and so to me it fit really well in this subgenre. Everything about this movie is pretty much fantastic. Stanley Kubrick is a master director, and his skill is on full display here. The movie, everything from it, the camera angles, the lighting, the performances, the sound design, everything is working together to give you this uncomfortable, amazing, entrancing, scary performance. I remember I saw this movie as a child. I saw it, I must have been, wow, I don't know, less than 10 years old. And I saw this, I think I was on video, or maybe it was on HBO. I don't really remember, but I saw it at home, not in a theater. And oh man, I was too young to watch this movie. I distinctly remember being terrified of the old woman in the bathtub. That really messed me up. That really got to me. I to this day I take showers. That one really got to me. But there's so many other images in there, famous images, the twins, the blood from the elevator. There's so many disturbing things in this movie that even as a child, where you don't really understand the vast majority of the psychological aspects going on in this film, there are plenty of scary images that will stick with you and give you nightmares. I say this with firsthand knowledge. So this movie was terrifying as a kid, and it's still unsettling even now. I can put this movie on, and my wife doesn't have to be watching it. She can just hear it and be like, nope. Because the sound design is so creepy and unsettling. The score, an amazing score, is unsettling as well. It's just a really masterfully made film, and obviously I'm pretty effusive about it, and I'm not the only one. Like I said, there are legions of fans that love this movie. Now, famously, the movie is not It's an adaptation of a Stephen King book, hence why I could have put in the Stephen King subgenre. But it's not a very faithful one. Stephen King doesn't really love this movie because Kubrick kind of did his own thing with it. It's pretty well known. And then King commissioned his own TV miniseries version of the book, which was not great. I would recommend you skip that. Don't ever watch that. It's pretty bad. Stick with the Kubrick movie. And then, of course, King wrote a sequel to it years later called Doctor Sleep. And they did a movie of that recently, which interestingly does really follow as a sequel to Kubrick's movie. And it's made by Mike Flanagan, and it's way better than it has business being. It shouldn't have been good, and it's not. It's not amazing. It's no Shining, I'll tell you that. But on its own, if you can try to not compare to The Shining, surprisingly, Doctor Sleep, I liked it quite a bit. I went in with really low expectations, so there's that. But I actually liked Doctor Sleep quite a bit. I thought it was really, really good. So maybe if you like The Shining, check out Doctor Sleep. If you're worried about that, how do you make a sequel to a classic? Kind of like when they were talking about Psycho. I don't know. I liked it. I thought it was good, so maybe give it a chance. But if you haven't seen The Shining, at the bare minimum, you've got to check out The Shining, the original Shining. And if you don't know that much about it, don't find anything else about it. Just go in as blind as you can possibly go in and let it happen to you because it's an experience. It's a really cinematic experience that just kind of has a wash over you. And then after you've watched it, go and delve into all of this rich backstory and materials about it because there's so many interesting things. The production of the movie is maybe as interesting as the movie itself, so it's definitely worth checking out and finding out more about The Shining if you like it. I highly recommend you delve into The Shining lore. But after you've seen the movie, don't spoil it for yourself. And of course, if you have thoughts on The Shining, if you've seen it, and many of you have, let me know what you think of it in the comments below. I imagine most of you like the movie. If you don't like the movie, let us know why. I promise we'll all be nice to you. But I'd like to know if you think it's overrated or if you think that it's dated or whatever it is that makes you not really care for it. I'd love to hear that in the comments as well because I like to hear those different perspectives. But The Shining, one of my personal all-time favorites since I was a little boy. I love that movie and highly recommend it. And the last movie we're talking about today, the postgraduate level selection, is Black Swan. Now, Black Swan came out in 2010, and it's another one of these prestige movies that people don't like to call a horror film and rather call it a psychological thriller. But believe me, it's a horror movie. If you're not familiar with it, the movie stars Natalie Portman as a ballerina who is trying to get the part of the lead role in a production of Swan Lake. And the role is a dual role where she plays both the White Swan, which is like an innocent and naive character, and the Black Swan, which is more sensual and risque. And she's nailing the White Swan, but she's not doing so well with the Black Swan. And then Mila Kunis shows up as a rival who is really less technically good, but also dances with unbridled passion and is crushing the Black Swan thing. And as a result, and all the pressure that's on Natalie Portman's character, she starts to go a little insane and starts to have mental health issues, we'll say it that way, and then hijinks abound because, again, I'm not going to spoil it, but Black Swan is fantastic. It's another one of those movies. We talked about this when we talked in our thriller subgenre. We talked about movies that get called thrillers, get called psychological thrillers because they don't like to call them horror movies. And Black Swan is one of these. And Black Swan was another one of these critically acclaimed movies, kind of like Silence of the Lambs, where it got Academy Award nominations and other critical acclaim. Natalie Portman justifiably won an Academy Award for her performance in this. So people don't want to give it credit and call it a horror movie, but it's a horror movie. It's directed by Darren Aronofsky, who's a director that I really, really like. We've talked about him, I think, only once before with his movie Mother, but he, pretty much just about every movie he's made, I really, really like. He's an exceptional director, a really good visual storyteller, and he likes to he's not afraid to tackle some really weird, taboo, and dark subjects, and Black Swan is a perfect example of that. The movie is buoyed by the performances of the actresses, in particular Natalie Portman, who gave, like, again, an Oscar caliber performance, and she won the award, and again, she deserved it. Mila Kunis is also great in it. Winona Ryder makes an appearance, and as some of you may know, I love Winona Ryder. She's one of my favorite actresses, so her popping up in that was great. Vincent Cassel. The cast is fantastic, and the performances are a big part of this movie because, again, what you're really dealing with is Natalie Portman's character basically going insane because of the immense amount of pressure being put on her to try to get this part and perform in this ballet. and it works really, really well. Again, it helps that Aronofsky, master storyteller that he is, can visually show this descent into madness without having to spell it out so much. In fact, if you're looking for a quick cookie cutter explanation of what's going on, you might not get it. This movie doesn't necessarily spoon feed it to you. I think it's pretty easy to follow, but I think that you also run the risk of if you're one of those people that really kind of needs it to be kind of explained to you, you might not get what you're looking for here. It really just kind of leaves a bit up for interpretation to you. How much of what you're seeing is real? How much of it is in Natalie Portman's head? It's a fun ride. I'll put it that way. It's a very fun ride. I was really surprised when I saw this movie because I didn't know what to expect with this. I had no idea, and I had no idea that it was really going to be a horror movie because again, it was not really marketed that way. It looked like it had some kind of horror elements to it, but it really does. I don't know if it'd be scary. It's not a boo scare movie. It's not a jump scare movie. So if your definition of horror is jump scares and things make you go, this is not going to be it. But if you're into the things I like, which are these movies that kind of stick with you and kind of get into your head and kind of make you unsettled and kind of go and just kind of give you that unsettled feeling, Black Swan's a good ride for you to check out because it really does that. It's just a really well made movie. All the movies we're talking about today are extremely well made, and in this one, I mean, I'm comparing Aronofsky to Hitchcock and Kubrick, two of the greatest directors to ever live, and I wouldn't put Aronofsky necessarily in their echelon, but this movie can hold its own against those movies. It's that good. And again, opinions may differ on that one, but I really think Black Swan is fantastic. I will admit I don't revisit it as much as the other two, but I do think that it's worth revisiting. I just haven't gotten around to it, frankly. One interesting note when I was doing some research on the movie, though, is that apparently, and I didn't realize this until I read it, but it's true. This movie bears a striking similarity in terms of plot and narrative to a movie called Perfect Blue, an anime movie called Perfect Blue. Very, very, very similar plots. And Aronofsky has acknowledged this. He claims that it's not a ripoff, but let me just say, we're going to talk about Perfect Blue in the future because it actually is on the syllabus. It's a fantastic movie, by the way. And we'll go into this in more detail then. But yeah, Black Swan ripped off Perfect Blue. It really did. But that said, it ripped off really, really well. It's an incredible movie. The narrative in of itself is interesting. It is, but it's really the way the movie's made. The imagery, the visual storytelling, the performances that come together to make this movie as fantastic and unsettling as it is. If you haven't seen Black Swan, I definitely highly recommend it and give you an opportunity to discover it for yourself. And if you have seen it, let me know your thoughts are, because I know that I'm pretty effusive about it, but I also know that my opinion is not universal. Even though the movie was very critically acclaimed and very commercially successful, not everybody loves it. Not everybody thinks it's a horror movie. I really disagree with that. I think it's clearly a horror movie, but not everybody agrees with me. So if you're one of the people that disagrees with me, please let us know in the comments your opinion on that, because again, I like those counterpoints. I like to have those differing opinions, polite opinions, of course, but I love to have you guys kind of in the comments voice your perspectives, your viewpoints on these movies. But yeah, I definitely want to hear your viewpoint on Black Swan and all these movies. So hit us up in the comments and let us know what you think. So that's going to do it for our descent into madness this week, but we have a few extra credit movies for you to check out if you like this subgenre, and I do. The first one I'm going to mention to you is a movie called The Machinist. And The Machinist is probably a movie that's more well known for its star's physical transformation than for its narrative. If you haven't seen it, it's a movie starring Christian Bale as a machinist, a guy who works in a machine shop, and he's an insomniac and he can't sleep, and he's really gaunt and thin. And in fact, Christian Bale lost 60 some odd pounds for the movie. And it's really kind of about like him and what's wrong with him. And it's kind of a mystery. And I don't want to go too into it because I don't want to spoil it. But the movie, like I said, is less noteworthy for the mystery than it is because Christian Bale lost those 60 some odd pounds. He looks horrifying in the movie. He looks so emaciated. He looks sickly, probably because he was sickly at the time. And especially if you've seen him in like Batman or American Psycho, where he's like a physical specimen, where his body is like cut and chiseled like like a Greek god, and then see him in this. And the movies weren't that far apart, frankly. It's shocking. It's shocking what he went through, what he put his body through to do this performance. And the performance is astounding. I mean, Christian Bale's always good, but he's astounding in this movie in no small part because of the physicality of it. And it will really haunt you. And that's like the biggest, scariest thing about the movie, probably, is his appearance. Because the movie itself is more mystery than horror, but that it's just so, the way it's shot, it's so grim and dark and foreboding, and his appearance is so unnerving that, well, frankly, it makes it kind of unsettling and scary. Now, the narrative itself, the mystery, I won't spoil it for you here, but I will say that I found it to be a little bit trite at the end. I felt through most of the movie that it played out pretty well, but when I got to the end, it was okay. It wasn't horrible. I didn't feel cheated or let down or anything like that. Just didn't blow my mind. It was well made as this movie is, and as how as great as Bale's performance is. I kind of expected something just a little bit more. Maybe that's just me coming with too high of expectations, but I could have used a little bit better resolution to the mystery. But that's admittedly a nitpick. It's a great film. It's a fantastic performance, and if you haven't seen it, you should definitely check it out. The next movie that we're going to talk about for extra credit is Edge of Sanity. And Edge of Sanity came out in the late 80s, and it stars Anthony Perkins again. But this time the movie is it's a story. It's a telling of the Jekyll and Hyde story, the Robert Louis Stevenson Jekyll and Hyde story, mashed together with Jack the Ripper. And I mean, that sounds like a great premise, and I love this movie. I absolutely love this movie, but it ain't for everybody. The movie is it's kind of sleazy. There's no other way to put it. It's a sleazy take on Jekyll and Hyde meets Jack the Ripper. And the main reason I think I like this movie, there's two reasons. One is because I like both Jack the Ripper and Jekyll and Hyde stories. I'm into those kind of things. Those are kind of sweet spots for me. But also Anthony Perkins. Like I said, I really like his performances. And in this one, he's unhinged. He kind of goes really big in this movie, like ludicrously big. Like he's kind of camping it up and like hamming it up. And I think it's incredibly effective in the movie. I think that he is chewing scenery, and it makes for a really fun ride. He can't take the movie tremendously seriously, and I don't think it's really trying to have you take it terribly seriously. But it's a fun ride watching Perkins just chew up scenery. He's fantastic in the role, and he makes it for me. But it is sleazy. It's not a beloved movie. Like it's I think a lot of you might not have even heard of it before. But I really liked. I caught it on cable one night late, years and years ago. What is this? Oh, Anthony Perkins. I'll check that out. And I was very pleasantly surprised. I was like, wow, I've never heard of this movie. But I love it. It's fantastic. And it's an edgy take on both of those source materials. I mean, Jack the Ripper's pretty gruesome, if you know about that anyways, but just the way the spin they take on it is pretty, it's pretty lurid, pretty, like kind of exploitation-y. It really is kind of an exploitation flick, but I really enjoy it. So if you haven't seen that, definitely check it out. Anthony Perkins playing Mad is always good, so you can't go wrong with that. And the last movie that we're going to talk about today for extra credit is a movie called Split. And Split is a M. Night Shyamalan movie, and as those of you who watch the syllabus regularly know, I love me some Shyamalan. And so, yeah, I kind of put Split in this subgenre, but I do think it fits, and if you are familiar with the movie, you know why. I don't want to spoil it too much, but I don't think it's too much of a spoiler because it was shown in the trailer to tell you that the movie is about somebody with dissociative identity disorder. And again, we talked about in the beginning of the video how poorly horror films play with mental health issues regarding identity. This would be one of them, and it's a more modern one, so there's less excuse to it. However, without spoiling this movie, you can kind of give this movie a pass because this movie is not as realistic as you might think for most of it. And I don't want to say much more than that. But the movie is about a person with dissociative identity disorder who winds up kidnapping some young girls. And it's really a really good horror film. It's Shyamalan knows how to make good suspense and horror. And he's doing his thing here, and it works really, really well. The performances by James McAvoy and Anya Taylor-Joy in particular, absolutely fantastic. James McAvoy just steals the show as the antagonist, and Anya Taylor-Joy is a revelation. Those of you who have seen The Queen's Gambit know how good she is, but this is the first time I saw her in here, and I was just blown away. But the movie is because it's Shyamalan's return to form, and I think a lot of people felt that way. That he was kind of on the outs. His career had not done so well. I mean, I'm a famous Shyamalan apologist, but even I had to admit that some of those later movies before this one were not great. But then he did The Visit, and people thought that was pretty good. And then this one, people were like, "Oh, he's back." Debatable whether or not he's really back, but this movie is extremely, extremely good, and managed to surprise everybody in an era where it's very hard to surprise everybody in this social media internet era. It's very hard to surprise everybody, but it did. And I mean, I guess I could kind of talk about it a little bit because I think it's pretty public knowledge now. But yeah, I'm not going to. Split is really fascinating because of that surprise, and it turns the movie on its head because it's like I said, it's kind of a straight kidnapping horror movie with dissociative identity disorder madness kind of thing going on. But then at the very end, it kind of becomes something else entirely, and I absolutely loved it. And I'm not the only one. Man, we're just gonna say if you haven't seen Split, you should check it out. Especially if you've seen some of Shyamalan's earliest movies. Let's just say it that way. If you've seen some of Shyamalan's earliest movies, then you should absolutely see Split. And I don't want to say any more because I'm so tempted to just spoil this, and I don't want to spoil it for anybody who hasn't seen it. But it is great, even if you haven't seen anything else with Shyamalan's. Even if you just watch this movie on its own actually stands up really, really well. Like I said, as a straight horror movie about madness. I think it's an excellent one, and I think it holds up really, real well. And that's what I thought I was getting when I went in, and it delivered. Everything else is just like gravy on top, or chocolate syrup, if you want to go back to a Hitchcock reference. But Split is great. I love it. I love me some Shyamalan, so of course I'm gonna bring up Split. But if you haven't seen it, and if you haven't seen it and you haven't been spoiled, check it out. So that's going to do it for this week's video. Thank you guys very much for your attendance. I appreciate you guys as always. This one is a lot of fun. All the movies that we talked about today are movies I like quite a bit. So if you haven't seen any of them, go check them out. It's like I don't think you'll be disappointed. There's a lot of good stuff this week. It's fun when we do a video and like all 6 of the movies that get brought up are movies that I really, really like, and that's what happened this week. And so this was a fun one. I hope you guys thought it was fun too. Let me know in the comments what you guys think, and give me, of course, your recommendations for movies that fit to the madness subgenre. Again, some of the movies you come up with might be coming up in other subgenres that we're going to talk about in the future, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't mention them because I'm really enjoying the recommendations in the comments below. So by all means, please share with us all your thoughts on what other movies we should be looking at. So looking forward to seeing that. And until next week when we talk about some of the movies that I alluded to today, class dismissed.